Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to finally be able to share this program. It was scheduled a year ago on the T-Series. It had to be canceled because of the pandemic. Uh, I've This is no more than a survey of the female sports activity in Wood County, especially in the early portion of the 20th century, the teens, 20s, 30s. And there's so much more out there. I keep finding things all the time. I'm doing an expanded report on this in the January, February newsletter of the Wood County Genealogy Society. And I'm also planning to continue to do some exploration because every time I turn around, I'll find some more information. Many of you might be aware that the high school programs and the college programs, college women's sports programs have grown tremendously since the early 1970s, shortly after Title IX was passed, 1972, protects people from discrimination based on sex and education programs or activities that receive federal financial assistance. In Wood County before 1950, most of the 19 townships in Wood County had at least one high school. Larger communities such as Bowling Green, Perrysburg, North Baltimore, Portage, Rossford had schools for their immediate areas. For example, Bowling Green included Center and Plain townships, which surround the city. Portage eventually became part of the Bowling Green city school system. And villages as small as Custer and Rudolph had their own high schools early in the 20th century. I know that Rudolph consolidated into the Liberty Township District in 1921. My grandmother graduated from Custer High School in 1920, but I haven't been able to find out when that Custer High School went into the Milton Township School. I'm sure it's out there. I just haven't found the right reference. One of the things that surprised me and has been greatly enhanced by digitization of newspapers by various libraries is how widespread the high school girls basketball program was in the early 20th century. It wasn't limited to just basketball, but that's by far the most prevalent sport that was played. The game was much different than what we know today. Girls had 6 members on the floor, and all 6 of them were restricted somewhat on where they could be on the floor. I don't understand all the rules, know all the rules, but it's a much different game today. Essentially, the girls today play with the same rules that the boys do, and it's become a very popular sport to follow. This is a newspaper clipping from the April 11th, 1919 Daily Sentinel Tribune. The Rudolph team that year put together a 10-1 record, outscoring their opponents 291 to 102. Among the schools they defeated were North Baltimore, Grand Rapids, Van Buren, which is in Hancock County, Perrysburg twice, Relton, which is located in Henry County to the west. And then this particular excerpt from the newspaper was very unusual. It's the only thing I've ever found this big that included a picture in the newspaper of the team. And that's one of the reasons the picture isn't real clear, because printed on newsprint and very old. These digitized newspapers come from microfilm, and some of the microfilm isn't the greatest, but at least we have things preserved that we can see. You see that the team members in the top row, Ruth Elliott, Coach Roberts, and Irene Dusler, Ellen Berry, Bernice Scheffler, and Olive Matz in the second row, and Grace Spittler, Lucille Hilliard, and Josephine Metz in the front row. Now they eventually, Rudolph consolidated, 2 years later, Rudolph consolidated into the Liberty Township School, which is just 2 miles to the west. It was a much bigger, actually the building, both buildings still exist. The Rudolph High School is now known as the Rudolph Civic Center. It's on Rudolph Road, a little ways north of Mermill Road, across the street from the cemetery there. And then Liberty Township building, school building is still at the southwest corner of Liberty High and Mermill Road, but it's privately owned. And then the next picture I have here is the 1921 Bowling Green High School girls basketball team. Some of the school yearbooks included information about the girls sports teams that existed. Others I found reference in the newspaper to teams, but I didn't find any pictures in whatever yearbooks I could find. The Wood County District Public Library has a nearly complete run of Bowling Green High School yearbooks. They also have some other yearbooks from schools around the county. The Wood County Historical Museum, from which I'm broadcasting today, so to speak, has also a fairly decent collection of high school yearbooks and other high school memorabilia, including a couple of trophies from the collection that I'll share a little later. This is the 1921 high school yearbook, or high school yearbook photo from the High Echo is what it's called. The team did not have a spectacular season, but they did get invited to the Wood County girls basketball tournament. They defeated Weston in the defending champ Weston, the opening round, and beat Rossford, Perrysburg, and Prairie Depot, which is now known as Wayne. They played 4 games in 2 days. Team members here: Olive Matz, Gladys Hannawalt, Thelma Jones, Gertrude Fry, Esther March. In the back row, Carol Beaverstock, Helen Whipple, Coach Gerhardt, Esther Merlin, Gladys Pease, and Helen McClure. Now, if you remember from one slide back, in the Rudolph team from 1919, you notice the name Olive Matz. Apparently, at some point after that, she transferred to Bowling Green. I'm guessing Olive might have been a sophomore in 1919, and somehow she transferred, may have moved to Bowling Green. So she played on 2 rather successful teams in her high school career. This is one of the few indications I've been able to find that there were also girls baseball teams. This is from the 1930s, the Portage Township yearbook. They only played 3 or 4 games. I also noted that in the girls basketball team photo in that yearbook, many of these same girls were on the basketball team. There isn't a whole lot of information about baseball that I found. I know that Pemberville also had a team occasionally. Webster, which joins Webster Township, which joins Freedom Township, which includes Pemberville, and Webster played a couple of games. And one year that was the only 2 games the 2 schools played. So there weren't that many baseball teams that existed, at least not that I've been able to find. What interests me is a lot of the times when I found newspaper stories, maybe a short story about what's going on with a basketball team. Often it's described as the girls took several machines, and the machines were cars. They weren't calling them anything but machines in a lot of the early newspaper stories. You have to remember that in the 1910s and 20s, and even into the 30s, that a lot of the roads were gravel at best. Very few were actually paved. So it must have been quite an adventure for the teams to travel around to play games. Now, later into the 30s, in the yearbooks, late 20s, early 30s, I'm seeing pictures of school buses in the yearbooks. So I'm pretty sure they probably had gone to the school bus for their transportation at games by then. But I think a lot of them relied on parents driving the kids to the games along with some of the other players. Pemberville had a successful basketball team several times through the 20s. This was a team that had a very successful season until they reached the Wood County tournament, where they lost their first 2 games and were eliminated. Coach E.R. Butcher built the team around 4 returning players, and he in the yearbook, he praised the girls for their, quote, head work under the stress of the game. Although the yearbook did not print the names of the girls under the photo, all of their names and a short biography was found on another page. Their names were Marjorie Grover, Margaret Muir, Leona Myers, Mildred Emmett, Twyla Peoples, Mary Ward, Irene Van Camp, Ruth Mentor, and Josephine Bolus. Some of those names are still familiar to me from the Pemberville area. There was also a boys and girls track team at Pemberville that same school year. And there's one other school, I can't remember it off the top of my head right now, that I found had a combined boys and girls track team. And that's one of the stories I'm going to expand upon in the genealogy newsletter that will come out in January for the Genealogy Society. I just found that information on the other track team and some of the information on this team as well. So hopefully we can learn a little more about how extensive it was. According to the one story I did find, there was at that time a district track meet for girls. I do not know whether there was a state meet as well. It was held at Bowling Green State University. So I've got to do a little more research on that. Now this is Portage Village, the village of Portage, which is, many of you know, just south of Bowling Green, had its own high school. And this is from their yearbook in 1922. This yearbook's at the Wood County District Library. Now there's only 16 pages there. It has the covers, and it's not in very good shape. I don't know if the yearbook was larger than the 16 pages that are available at the library, but if we could ever find that, we might have a little more information about the school. They seem to have, they also had a boys program. There's a short story in the yearbook that says that their first team was in 1919 and indicated that this team had a record of 11 wins and 4 losses, but there's no indication of what teams they played. I'm guessing it was teams in the central and maybe western part of Wood County. The girls here, the top row, W. Collins, E. Meek, M. Nelson, Mr. Klukas. I found out that Mr. Klukas was also the coach of the boys team, and he was also the superintendent of the Portage Village School. E. Baird and H. Killian. The bottom row, C. Meek, H. Munn, and H. Hill. I have a feeling, and I haven't done any more research, but there are also in the one other photo I have, there's an H. Munn, which might be the same player at a different school. Everybody seems to transfer at one time or another. It's very common today. This is another example with the digitized newspapers through the Wood County District Public Library. What I was doing was putting in girls basketball and asking for the exact phrase. And sometimes the story of the basketball team would be found in what we always, when I was working at the Sentinel Tribune, we called them country letters. There were correspondents around the county, even into the 70s, 1970s, that sent in all kinds of information about who visited who. Here you can see Mrs. Ross, Ireland, Mrs. Joe Small spent Sunday afternoon with Mrs. Belle Sweeby. Now down farther, Toward the end, there's a paragraph, which I didn't highlight and should have. Several people here loaded their machines with Liberty High School girls and took them to North Baltimore, where they played BHS girls basketball, but were defeated with scores of 4-21 in favor of the BHS girls. The digitized newspapers are really, really helpful. You have to get a little selective in your search, otherwise all kinds of extra things come up. But I did find using digitized newspapers stories on the front page of the paper with rather large headlines, and there seemed to be a large following of the programs, at least those that were successful. And during the 70s, I was sports editor of the Sentinel Tribune for several years when the girls' sports programs were reinstated. Basketball was the first one to really come around, but they've quickly added volleyball and soccer and track and field, of course, and a couple others. Golf, I believe several of them have. Some have had gymnastics. I'm not sure that's caught on much because the equipment for gymnastics can be pretty expensive for a school to invest in. And if you don't have the participants, it really may not work out. But the programs have thrived since the 70s. Here's an example of 1917 Bowling Green High School. That story is at the top left of page 1 in this particular issue of the Sentinel. Bowling Green defeated Perrysburg 31-11, and that was the first game at the high school building on South Grove Street that had been completed 2 years earlier. For those of you that aren't familiar with Bowling Green, or even if you are, that location is where the new Wood County Senior Center was just opened. That building was built in 1913 or 14, was just torn down a few years ago after the new middle school was built, and also the high school across the street was torn down. Anyway, the story goes into great detail on the game, and Helen Wilcox led Bowling Green with 17 points, and Berta Benscooter scored 10. Toward the end of the story, the uniforms are described as blouses and bloomers, and noted that, quote, hairpins, barrettes, and other feminine articles were frequently lost by the girls, but did not cause significant delay to the game. Now, I can bet you a significant amount of money that a male wrote that story, but that would be, and I even have an idea who wrote it because I know who was probably writing the sports for the Sentinel at the time. Didn't know the man, but I know the name. I won't pin him down because I don't know for sure. A week later, also on page 1, the Bowling Green girls had a game against Oak Harbor, and it was April 24th, 1915. Now, Bowling Green had intermittent girls basketball teams, and they had several coaches. I think some of the problem was they couldn't find coaches. And finally, in 1927, they went to a total intramural program, which still existed as the Girls Athletic Association when I was a student at Bowling Green High School in the late 60s. And that was all intramural activity. Perrysburg had the same problem. They had teams on and off. They had some pretty successful teams in the late teens and early 1920s, including winning a what was called a Northwest Ohio tournament at Bryan with 700 teams. And but they also had trouble putting together a program and dropped their program in 1927 in favor of an intramural program. In fact, in the I believe it's the 1927 Perrysburg yearbook, which is here in the museum, there's a multi-page explanation of why the program was dropped. By the late 1930s, many schools were no longer offering girls sports. I'm suspecting that some of it had to do with lack of funds being the Great Depression, but the local newspapers, also these Rising Sun Unique Weekly from Eastern Wood County and other weekly newspapers in Wood County continued to publish short stories, at least when their girls teams, local girls teams had games. At the upper left, this is Rising Sun, I believe. The girls basketball team played Jackson, Amsden, that's in nearby Sandusky County, and lost by a score of 26-17. Gives the scoring of the who the leading scorer was and who played the various positions. It was a clean, hard-fought game, and all the players are to be complimented on their playing. Tuesday night, the team meets Burgoon, which is another small town in Sandusky County, and we appreciate the support we had from the community. I suspect this is one of the team members of the coach that turned in this story to the Rising Sun Unique Weekly. And then the other one is a team that the Rising Sun girls played Weston and won 32-2. Many of these games are very lopsided, and but that's the same case today. Some teams don't. Now this is a much later photo. I date this to the late 1950s or very early 1960s. This was an amateur athletic association team that was sponsored by a Bowling Green firm called BG Athletics. That was, they also had BG Athletic Supply in Bowling Green. There was also Athletic Supply in Toledo. I don't know whether there was any association there, but apparently the Amateur Athletic Union had quite a number of teams competing in the general area. It could have been a much wider area. I haven't been able to find very much information about this. I did find through Tom Black's daughter, who's the person up in the upper left, I did manage to find someone who had the identification for these pictures, for this picture. This was a photo that I found in the Sentinel Tribune files when they were closing their building on Poe Road. I got a pile of stuff delivered to me from the one of the sports files. This didn't have names on the back. It didn't have a date, but I did do some research in the Bowling Green directories and found that Athletic Supply operated in the late 50s and early 60s at 2 or 3 locations in Bowling Green. And I don't know anything, I haven't had any time to really do any genealogy on any of the people, other than I know Tom Black passed away this past year. I think he was 90. And this is it just is interesting that R.C. Sampson was a private professional photographer from the Lucky area. And I have seen other photos that he took of various teams and schools events. This struck me as just interesting. It's the back of the, it's an ad on the back of the Portage yearbook I've mentioned earlier, talking about the Rudolph bus going north, going south, serving Rudolph, Mermill, and Portage, and to the south, or going north, I mean, and then serving Bowling Green, Portage, Mermill, and Rudolph to the south. And doesn't give a price, but I'm guessing it was pretty cheap. And they could handle special calls from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. So not only was there an interurban that still would have been serving that area of the county at that time, there was the this bus. There are many other aspects to this story that I'm still discovering, and I wish that I hope that anybody who has any old yearbooks or other items, trophies, whatever, that might include information, would think seriously about if they're thinking about throwing them away, rather than doing that they take the time to contact Holly here at the museum, the curator here at the museum, tell her what you have, and she can let you know. Just don't bring it and drop it off, or just don't show up, please, with it, and expect her to be here or to be able to take care of it. Like to know what's coming in. Museum doesn't turn down much, especially if it's things we don't have and can add to the collection. But if you have things that you want to donate to the museum, please do so. The same thing if you want to give things to a library in your immediate area. Check with them first. Let them know what you have, and you can get it figured out. That it can be a quick exchange, and make sure to include whatever information you can, so that things can be preserved and extended. Now, I've got a couple of trophies here from our museum. If I can figure out how to get myself back on so I can show them. Here comes Marissa. She's gonna bail me out. Yeah, drop down menu. All I had to do was push the right button.
All right, let's see. All right. There we go.
There we go. Okay, we have two what were called loving cups in the stories that I found about trophies that were awarded the girls. This says girls winner SE District Wood County Tournament 1929, won by. Now it doesn't say, it's not engraved about what school it was won by, but our records here at the museum show that this was donated by a Melvin householder who was from Bloomdale at the time. I don't know what year it was donated. It could be many years ago, but that's one of the two trophies that I was able to find in the collection. We have another one that's girls Northeast District basketball winner 1929. And on the back, it lists Bruce Frobos as a captain, Luella Kuhlman, Irene Davidson, Bernice Roller, Helen Lehman, Mary Waddell, Marl Burkholder, Melba Rose Loomis, and Mary V. Roller as the team members. Now several of those names I recognize from names today that are in Pemberville and Freedom Township. So I don't know if that's accurate, but my semi-educated guess is that that's probably where this trophy came from. And we have nothing in the record that says, other than we've had it since June 2005. We don't know who gave it to us, which might help us locate it. It's one of those things that may well have just shown up on the doorstep. And when things show up on the doorstep in a box, get dropped off, we have trouble locating any more information, try to add them to the collection, but it makes life a lot easier for Holly and the folks here at the museum. If people let them know that they've got something they'd like to donate, tell them what it is, maybe email them a picture, and then we can communicate and see whether it's something that needs to be added to the collection. Like I say, most things are. So I think I've covered everything I had in the slideshow today. I know there's a lot more information out there. And if you have any of it, or know of anybody who would be interested in sharing information, you can get in contact with the museum and they can put me in contact with you then. We have any questions?
Any questions for Hal, anyone? Check the chat. I don't see any popping up.
Questions, Albert, just like I thought that was really interesting to see how far women's sports have come, especially as somebody who's played sports. It was really neat to see where it all started. How far, like you say, it's come.
Yeah, there was a lot more activity in the 20s, 100 years ago than a lot of people thought there was, I think.
Yeah,
Or
for
at least
sure.
a lot of the people who participated, the knowledge was lost when they passed. So it's interesting to see.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And if you want to know more, make sure to become a member of Wood County Genealogy and you'll get Hal's newsletter in January.
We'll do that.
Uh,
Thank you, Hal.
You're welcome.
All right. If anyone doesn't have any more questions, we'll go ahead and end today's session. But like Holly said earlier, this has been recorded and it'll be up on North Baltimore Public Library's YouTube page sometime later once they get it down and get it all cut and everything. So you can keep an eye out for it there if you happen to miss anything, or if you know someone who would be interested in viewing it, you can direct them to that page as well. So thank you again, everyone, for attending our series. This is the last one for the year. Big thank you goes out to Edwin and Irma Wolf and Lynn and Betty Wineland for being sponsors of our virtual history series this year. And we hope to see you for some of our programming in 2022.
Thank you for sharing your programs with us. We've really enjoyed it.
We've enjoyed partnering with you as well. All righty, well, everyone have a great day and we'll hope to see everyone soon.